All right, 5.6. This is another method for finding the x-intercepts as opposed to factoring. And before we actually get into that, we've got to learn how to simplify a square root. So, a radical, that's kind of another word for a square root, but a radical is the symbol that could be a square root, cube root, or anything like that, but we're going to be using square roots. So I might use the word radical as opposed to square root. And I want you to use your calculator to list the first 15 perfect squares. So like 1 squared is 1. 2 squared is 4. The next one would be 9, and so on. So list the first 15. So do 4 squared, 5 squared, 6 squared, all the way up to 15 squared. Just use that one, it's fine. I'm going to be giving you all new calculator numbers. To what? I'm not sure. All right, so get up through the first 15 perfect squares. All right, your first 15 perfect squares are 1, 4, 9, 16, 25, 36, 49, 64, 81, 100, 121, 144, 169, 196, and 225. You should know those, have those memorized. Now, maybe not to go through them that fast, but you should be able to know that 8 times 8 is 64. You should know that the square root of 64 is 8. You should know that the square root of 144 is 12. 12 is good. If you can get them up to 12, that's probably all that you will actually need for these next few lessons. So when you type in the square root, so I want everybody to go to your calculator, and when you type in the square root of any one of those numbers, 36 for example, you get 6. You get a whole number. But when you type in the square root of some number that's not a perfect square, like 32, you get a decimal. And decimals are not going to be acceptable for this lesson. So we're going to learn how to simplify a square root and not have a decimal left. We'll actually still have a square root in your answer, but it will be completely simplified. Kind of like if I have the fraction 5/10, when I simplify it, it's 1/2. Still a fraction, but it's still simplified. So let's get started looking at some of these square roots. You can take the square root of a fraction. You just take the square root of the top, the square root of 4 over the square root of 9. You just take the square root of the top, you take the square root of the bottom. Is 4 a perfect square? Yep. What is the square root of 4? 2. Is 9 a perfect square? What's the square root of 9? 3. So 2/3. All right, so let's go to number 2. We have the square root of 1 over the square root of 81. What's the square root of 1? 1. And the square root of 81? 9. Did you just type in the square root of 1 over 81?
No, I was just going on.
Like,
Yeah,
I'm going to show you how to get that.
You'll get a decimal if you do it like that.
Right. Yeah, I'm going to show you what we're going to do with that. So then I have number 3. This is the same thing as having 2 times the square root of 144. What is the square root of 144? 12. So this is 2 times 12, which is 24. Again, it would be good, it would be better if you knew these. You did not need to type in the square root of 144 into your calculator. You should know that that's 12. Now the rest of these that we have, these numbers.
Jacob Durham, Devin Smith, report to the office immediately. Jordan Durham, Devin Smith.
These next numbers, we do not have perfect squares. So there's a process that we go through to simplify our answer. We're going to break this down into 2 parts. We're going to split the square root of 32 up. And I have to figure out what the largest perfect square is that I can divide 32 by. The largest one. If you don't pick the largest one, you won't get the correct answer. So what you want to do is we're going to divide. We want the largest one that divides into 32. So take 32 and then look at your list of perfect squares and just start dividing. But you don't want to start from the bottom or the smallest number because you want to start from the biggest and work your way back. So 32 divided by, start with a number that's kind of close to it, I guess, 25. It does not go evenly. So then go to your next. 32 divided by what's the next number? Next smallest number. 16. Does it go evenly? Yep. So I'm going to write this as the square root of 16 and the square root of 2. So 32 is the same thing as 16 times 2. So the square root of 32 is the square root of 16 times the square root of 2. Do you know what the square root of 16 is? 4. So I'm going to rewrite that as 4. And then the one that's left over, we just leave it as square root of 2. Like this. So that is completely simplified. 4 square root of 2, or 4 radical 2. Now here's a way to check your answer. Type in the square root of 32. Type in 4 square root of 2 and see if your decimals match. And if they did, you have the correct answer. Let's go to number 5. We have the square root of 12. So I want to know what the largest perfect square is that goes into 12. So 12 divided by 9. No. 12 divided by 4 is 3. So 4 times 3 is 12. So square root of 4 times the square root of 3.
Could you also use 6 there or not?
6 is not a perfect square. You can only divide it into perfect squares. Otherwise, we're in the same boat that we started in.
Would it matter which way you have the 4 or 3 right there?
Not at this point, but when you write your final answer, you write the whole number out front and then the square root. So I always like to put the perfect square first. So what is the square root of 4? What? 2. And then I'm left with square root of 3. Oh, thank you. So the square root of 12 is 2 square root of 3. let's go to number 6. $112. We're going to start dividing by my perfect square. So I'm looking at my list from up here. You don't want to start with any number bigger than 112. So, and you know 100 does not divide into 112 evenly. So start with 81. So 112 divided by 81. Nope. 112 divided by 64. Nope. 112 divided by 49. Nope. 36 is the next one. Nope. Now 25 does not go in there, but if you don't know that, you can try 25. 16, yep, it's 16 and 7. 16 times 7 gives me 112. And do you know what the square root of 16 is? It is 4, and then the square root of 7 is left. See if you can do number 7 on your own. All right, so 245. The largest perfect square that went into that is 49. And 49 times 5 is 245. We know that the square root of 49 is 7. Bring down my radical 5. 7 square root of 5. Probably not. Now, if your number down here is bigger, you could, but most of your examples aren't going to be like that. Yeah. All right, number 8. 5. This is really 5 times the square root of 72. So I have to break down this square root, and then I'll multiply it by 5. Okay. So we're looking for the largest perfect square that goes into 72. So we can, if you're not sure, 72 divided by 64. No. 72 divided by, going down my list, 49. 72 divided by 36. There it is. So 36 and 2. Not yet. What is the square root of 36? 6 square root of 2. The number that I multiply by 5 is the 6. So my final answer would be 30 square root of 2. This 5 that was in front, you multiply, once you have this broken down, you multiply this outside number by that 5. 5 times 6 is 30. Try number 9. All right, your final answer is 9 square root of 5. So what I did was I had to break down the square root of 45. And I knew that 9 times 5 is 45. 9 was the biggest perfect square. It's actually the only perfect square that goes into 45 evenly. And the square root of 9 is 3. Bring down your square root of 5. But I also had this 3 outside that needed to get multiplied. And 3 times 3 is 9. So 9 square root of 5. So we're going to get to some questions with quadratics and how we're going to find the x-intercepts using what we just learned. Not simplifying square roots. All right. No, it doesn't. All right. So if I have a quadratic, a parabola, what we've been learning about, if it looks like this, y equals ax squared plus c. If there's no b, no plain x, we have an x squared and just a number, you can solve it like this. It's way better than factoring. And so what we do is we try to get the x squared by itself. We get the x squared equal to some number. For example, it might look like this. X squared equals 32. Then we take the square root of both sides. So x would be the square root of n. So we get the x squared by itself. Just going to be like solving two-step equations, but having the square root at the end. So we're going to isolate x squared. That means get it by itself. Take the square root of both sides. When we write our answer, we have to put a plus or minus in the front. Because, and I'll show you an example on the calculator. It'll make more sense. So let's look at number 1. My goal is to get this x squared by itself. I want to move the 64 to the other side. So what do I need to do with that 64?
Add it to both sides.
So do plus 64 plus 64. And we get x squared equals what? 64. Is my x squared by itself?
Yes.
Yep. So now I take the square root. And I get x equals, what's the square root of 64? 8. And we need to put a plus or minus in front of that. And I'll show you why we put the plus or minus. I'm going to show you the graph. I'm going to show you the graph of x squared minus 64. It's a parabola. You just can't see the bottom of it.
Zoom out of it.
Where does this parabola cross the x-axis? 8 and negative 8. That's why we put the plus or minus, because it crosses at positive 8 and it crosses at negative 8. You could just do it like this. You could say 8 comma negative 8. Or you can just put plus or minus 8. That means positive 8, negative 8.
Oh, you can't even see it after you zoom out.
All right, number 2. My goal is to get the x squared by itself. So what do I do first? Subtract the 8 from both sides. What's 15 minus 8? 7. Then what? Is my x squared by itself yet? What do I need to do? Divide both sides by 7. And we get x squared equals what? Nope. 1. 7 divided by 7 is 1. And what's my last step? Take the square root. No, it's fine. And we get x equals, what's the square root of 1? 1. What do I need to put in front?
Plus.
The plus or minus. Plus or minus 1. Because it has an x-intercept at positive 1 and at negative 1.
So would you get it wrong if you didn't?
Yes, you'd only be half right because it has 2 x-intercepts. If you just put 1, you'd only be listing one of the 2 x-intercepts. Now, if you want to put 1 comma negative 1 or 1 and negative 1, that's fine too. This is just less writing. All right, number 3. What's my first step?
Subtract 5 on each side.
Good. And we get 81x squared equals 16. Then what? Divide by 81. Now, when you type this in, you're going to get a decimal. But both of these numbers are what? What's special about both of these numbers? They're what? They're both perfect squares. They're both on your list. And the first couple examples we did on the back page showed how to take the square root of a fraction. So we're just going to leave it as 16 over 81. Because when I take the square root, I just take the square root of the top and the square root of the bottom. So we get x equals plus or minus, what's the square root of 16? Square root of 81? 9. So plus or minus 4/9. Number 4. What's my first step? Yep. Subtract 1. And we get 8x squared equals 16. Then we divide by 8. And we get x squared equals what? 2. Take the square root of both sides. Is 2 a perfect square? Are there any perfect squares that go into 2? No. So our answer is just x equals plus or minus square root of 2. Number 5. Step 1. Add 9. We get 2x squared equals 64. Yep. Then I divide both sides by 2. We get x squared equals 32. Then what? Take the square root. Is 32 a perfect square? No. But can you divide 32 by one of those numbers on our list? Yep, you can. So you need to find the biggest perfect square that goes into 32. Now, we did do this example on the front side. Don't just copy it down. Pretend we didn't do this one. What's the largest perfect square that goes into 32? 16. 16 and 2. What's the square root of 16? 4, and then bring down your square root of 2.
Is it always going to have a plus and minus sign?
Yes. Yep. Just got to remember to put it. Try number 6 on your own. So once we did my subtracting and dividing, we get x squared equals 60. That's when we took the square root. And we get the biggest perfect square that goes into 60 is 4. 4 and 15. The square root of 4 is 2. Bring down my square root of 15. Put your plus or minus in the front.